Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Thank you so much for clicking on it. Tonight we have 2 hours of stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. I'm actually the like monster and I'm very, very hungry. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. Sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax. I don't judge. And as always, hope you all have a great night. You better have a great night. If you met me on the street and asked me what my job was, I would tell you that I work from home consulting for an industrial laundry company. That is, after all, the cover story I've been provided with. The reality? My job is even simpler. Every Friday night, I dress up nice, report to a certain theater downtown, have a seat, and watch a performance. That's it. All it takes is a couple hours out of my week, and I end up making 6 figures a year with every benefit you could possibly ask for. I know. It sounds too good to be true. Pretty much anybody on the planet would kill to have a job like mine. At least, perhaps, until they find out just what kind of performances I'd made to attend. Before I start, though, I need you to keep in mind that I'm a good person. I donate thousands to the Rainforest Fund out of every paycheck, and me and my kids volunteer at the food bank weekly. I'm a devout believer, and I'm going to heaven when I die. After all, I, myself, have never hurt anybody. Never raised a hand to injure any living soul. How could you possibly call me a sinner when all I ever do is watch? It started about 3 years ago, when their job offer found me when I was at my most desperate. All I was told was, every Friday night, I would attend a performance at my city's fanciest theater. That was it. I was baffled at first. What the hell do I know about theater, or ballet, or orchestras? Had they gotten me mixed up with some big shot critic? During our talk on the phone, however, they politely reassured me that no critical ability would be required. All we ask, they said, is for you to be there to bear witness. Everything about it screamed scam, but I figured, what the hell? Worst case scenario, I listen to a pitch for some MLM or timeshare, politely decline, and then walk out with some pocket money. I was baffled when I pulled up to the theater. Dozens, maybe even hundreds of people were streaming in, all in nice suits and gorgeous gowns. I'd thrown on the fanciest clothes I could afford, yet I still felt severely underdressed. The theater was totally rented out by my employer, and only my fellow co-workers were allowed in. How much could it have cost to hire such a massive crowd just to attend this one performance? Who could possibly bankroll something like this? I tried to empty my mind and simply merge into that human tidal wave flowing through the doors. Every staff member was dressed in a refined all-black suit, with black tie and undershirt. To the point they seemed to darken the air around them. Each wore a white comedy mask, the neoprene stretched into a grin of perpetual laughter, which struck me as almost mocking. They demanded that we hand over all electronic devices, even patting us down and running a metal detector over us. Then they reminded all attending not to leave their seats under any circumstances during the performance, recommending we take bathroom breaks before the show started, and to remain quiet and to keep our eyes open. They kept repeating the same mantra: no distractions, no diversions, no lapses in concentration. Remember, you are here to bear witness. If I'd been alone, I would have left right then and there. There was a tickling in the back of my brain, some primate part of me screaming that there was something terribly wrong here. But mob mentality is a hell of a thing. Everybody else seemed calm, nonplussed, handed their phones over without a fuss. There were a few holdouts, probably other newbies like me. But eventually they too relented. If everyone else is going along with it, I figured, why shouldn't I? Who wants to be the one single paranoid guy who missed out on an easy paycheck? Stepping into a gorgeous theater like something out of 3 centuries ago, I was most struck by the make of the stage. It looked like the back action of a piano. Strange levers and mahogany hammers looking like fingers manipulating countless lines of piano wire. Some were a dozen feet long. All the taut wires stretched in bizarre formations across the stage reminded me somehow of a spider's web. I could not fathom a machine so complex, yet with such little apparent purpose. The nature of the performance always varies. Sometimes it's a work of Shakespeare, a ballet, an opera, hell, even a puppet show. That day, it was a concert featuring a small chamber orchestra of around 35. Students, it looked like, young and inexperienced, with a nervous air about them as if this was their first time performing before such a crowd. Mostly a string section plus one of each woodwind, and just a couple each of horns and percussion. The conductor was one of the staff members in the comedy masks. I was baffled. Who would put forward this much cash just for a small green orchestra to play in such a massive, prestigious venue? One of them must be a billionaire's kid, I figured. It was the only explanation. This, I've since realized, is always the best part. The beginning of the performance, when you can, if you try, lose yourself in the display and pretend everything is okay. That it's all normal. And it was best on those lucky days when the performers on stage were completely unaware of just what sort of danger they were in. That always makes it easier for everybody. On that first day, I was as oblivious as they were, and simply enjoyed the music. Maybe some snob of the orchestral arts would hear their amateurish mistakes, but to my untrained ear, they sounded just fine. Pleasant, even. But one question began to worm its way into my head. A small nagging at first, which crescendoed into a hammering on the inside of my skull. How much time has passed? At a certain point, I suspected the intermission was long overdue, but there were no windows, and I had to part with my electronic wristwatch at the door, so really, getting any sense of time was impossible. I dismissed it as my lousy attention span at first. But eventually, others began taking notice. No one dared speak but among the fellow newbies. I noticed furrowed brows and sideways glances, confused and concerned. The performers seemed to be getting restless as well, whispering and gesturing to each other and the conductor, who never ceased those robotic, sweeping motions of his gloved hands. It must have been 2 hours by then, if I had to guess, and they were starting to look exhausted, dehydrated. Some even looked as if they were about to quit playing. Continue performing. In a moment, all of the piano wire loudly reverberated and stretched taut with the movements of those mechanical contraptions on stage, as the whole thing bristled and tensed as though it were a living thing. And that voice, cracking like thunder, seemed to emerge from the stage itself with a mechanical roar like the grinding of metal on metal. That seemed to frighten them into submission for a while. It wasn't until a half hour later that my life changed irreparably. They'd been playing a quiet sonata, so everybody could hear the sudden fur-ting, accompanied by a pained yelp. My eyes leapt to one of the violinists. One of her strings had broken, and happened to snap her right in the eye. I could see the streak of scarlet bifurcate her pupil, before the emerging blood replaced the entire eye with a thick redness. She stood, clutching a hand over her eye and blindly grasping with the other, gesturing for medical help. And as she did so, That strange lattice of levers and hammers and pulleys all roared and clacked to life, like a bear trap being sprung. The machine's efficacy was just as sudden, just as brutal. Those clockwork edifices moved like a pair of robotic arms, aiming a wire for her neck as if trying to garrote her. But they moved at such a speed that the wire seemed to pass through her, like she wasn't even there. For a moment she seemed fine, unaffected, as if nothing had happened at all. And then things began to fall off of her. Her head severed at the neck, alongside the hand she'd been holding over her eye, and the very fingertips of her other hand, with which she'd been grasping a little too high. All had been cut cleanly, with surgical precision. Time seemed to slow as they all went clattering wetly to the floor, and the girl's body soon followed, as if it took a few moments for gravity to set in, or perhaps for her body to realize she was dead. It happened so fast. It was hard to be properly horrified. It was more like, oh, maybe. Everybody stared at the chunks of meat that had once been a promising young woman with hopes and dreams. That spider web of wires was still rumbling and shaking all around them, and the mechanical voice roared once more. Continue performing. They were given no further warnings. A few of them jumped from their seats out of sheer instinct, not even thinking. None of them made it more than a step before the wires divided them in twain. The rest just kept playing exactly as they had been, as if their brain froze up at what they'd witnessed and simply ran on autopilot, until their faculties slowly returned to them and they realized that this instinct had saved their lives. Where once beauty filled the room, now the orchestra had been reduced to a discordant sound like a long, shuddering whine, like a mocking parody of music. They gripped their instruments with trembling, sweaty hands, playing just well enough to avoid stoking the ire of those quivering wires stretched taut all around them. They realized, gradually, that they were allowed to speak. Immediately they began wailing hard enough, almost to mercifully drown out that dismal cacophony that was once music. Some begging and pleading with the staff, others screaming out threats. Be they legal or physical, nothing they said could shake the masked men and women in the slightest. They stood at order like statues, unflinching. Realizing this, they turned their attention to us. A wall of red, weepy eyes scanning the crowd for any hint of mercy, begging us to band together against the staff, calling us all sick for just sitting there and watching them die. A blonde woman on violin had the most genius and cruel strategy of all. She merely began telling us about herself, everything she could think of, poured out between sniffles and tears. My name is Vera Hayes. That's my husband over there. She gestured to a dark-haired man on drums. He'd been the quietest of them all, seeming to be saving his strength. We have a little girl. She's 8 years old, and she loves her mama and papa. Her name is Lucy. She loves horses. I was saving up to maybe give her riding lessons one day. I desperately wanted to cover my ears, but knew it would be against the rules. Why can't she just shut up? I thought bitterly, grinding my teeth. I truly hated her more than I'd ever hated before. But why? Some dim remnant of my reason asked. She's a victim here. She's done you no wrong. But I realized. I hated her because she kept reminding me she was human. Reminded me of what I was doing to her. What we were all doing to her, sitting here in complicity. And it almost worked, too. I almost resolved to save her, but then came the boom of a gunshot from far behind me. The shot had come from someone standing amid the upper gallery, I was certain. I almost made the mistake of looking back. Instead, I kept my eyes locked forward and merely imagined who it was that just had their brains splattered across the seat. Had they snuck a phone in and tried calling 911? Had they tried making a break for it? Or maybe they just couldn't take it anymore and made the fatal decision to look away from the horror. I tried to distract myself by studying the impossible mechanism, animating the blood-soaked piano wire. I couldn't figure it out. It was an impossible machine existing in defiance all basic laws of geometry, and seemed to have no means of controlling it, instead operating automatically with some malign intelligence. Perhaps it was an extension of whatever creature composed the stage itself. It was a living thing. Of that much I was certain. It breathed beneath the performers, and their blood soaked into its floorboards in moments, as if consumed. After some hours, the orchestra had gone quiet, having screamed themselves hoarse. I couldn't imagine being in their shoes. Even just watching them perform was a test of endurance. Many of them oozing blood all over their instruments. From scarlet cuts where the skin had split, the woman on the French horn was struggling hardest of all, her lungs and hands burning with exhaustion. "I can't," she eventually cried out in a hoarse little wheeze, horn slamming to the floor as her body gave out. "I'm so sorry. I can't do any." A wire passed through flesh in an instant, and suddenly she had no mouth to speak, no eyes to see, no mind to think with. All of it lay splattered upon the stage, which sated itself upon that spilled vitae. Another gunshot. I quivered in my seat, sweat beading on my forehead from the terror. Somebody in the audience had looked away, and I realized I had just been about to do the same thing, had the sudden sound not knocked me out of my stupor. Most of the performers went in similar ways over the next few hours, either making mistakes or their bodies giving out. As monstrous as it may sound, I was quietly praying for them to get it over with. They were dead the moment that they walked on stage. Why drag it out for all these hours, just for the inevitable to happen anyway? I recognize now that it's almost impossible to make that choice, to simply give in and accept death in defiance of all our natural instincts. But the auditorium now reeked from audience members avoiding their bowels, and the woman next to me just wouldn't stop crying, wouldn't stop at all. Vera and her husband lasted the longest of all, perhaps because they had each other. Over a dozen hours had passed, maybe even 2, and they were still playing a little duet in perfect sync, despite everything. By now, they were simply talking to each other as if nothing was wrong, as if we weren't even watching. "Baby, when we get out of here, I'm going to take you to Martha's Vineyard. I know I've been saying that for so long, but God, I wasted so much money on that stupid motorcycle," he said. "Lucy's going to love it." Vera chuckled. "I don't know. It might be boring for a little girl. Isn't it all a bunch of old people up there?" He laughed weakly. Maybe in town, but you know her. Once you get her in the water, you can't get her back out. She's a natural-born swimmer, I swear. Think we'll see her in the Olympics someday." It was surreal to watch, like I was peeking in on a private conversation a couple was having in their own home. But I could tell both of them were trying to maintain some illusion of normalcy, anything to keep themselves psychologically intact as the hours pass. Even as they tried to smile and laugh, there was a quiver in their tone, a desperation, a fear of what might happen if there was a single break in the conversation. A lot of what they said was too personal to relay here. They went into old regrets, past mistakes, resolved every argument they ever had in all their years together. It was like they wanted to make sure they said everything they had to say before the end came. I think I owe them, at least, their privacy. But the husband was slowly deteriorating. He'd moved too quick, caught the symbol with his hand, leaving a wide gash along his palm that was gushing blood at a terrifying rate. Now he was getting woozier and woozier, swaying dizzily, his eyes unfocusing, his speech becoming slurred and his playing sloppy. Vera desperately tried to keep him focused. "Talk to me, baby. Think of the beach. Lucy's going to love the seashells. She'll pick her favorite and put it on that little stand in her room, with all her little trophies." She rambled on, but by the end, all he could manage was half-hearted grunts of affirmation. He was leaning in his seat, and then his drumstick went flying right out of his hand, sending a cloud of pink mist through the air along its path. And yet he kept going through the motions of playing, as if he didn't even notice. Then a sudden clarity formed in his eyes, and he stared at his empty hand in disbelief. And then the piano wire was tensing and strumming all around him. And then in an instant he was up from his seat and racing towards us. He knew it was over. He just wanted to strike out at the world if he could. One last act of defiance. He even locked eyes with me, and I'll never forget the look on his face. "Why are you watching this? You're all sick and twisted and..." He threw his remaining drumstick, and the trajectory would have delivered it right to me, but the piano wires lacerated it in midair, slicing into it from 100 different directions until it disappeared into a cloud of sawdust. And then they did the same to him. Vera didn't scream or sob. She just tensed and let out the tiniest little gasp, like when you're at the doctor's and know the shot is inevitable. But it still stings anyway. And then she was all alone. She looked to us like she wanted to speak, wanted to say something, to express what was happening inside her. But what was there left to say? She'd spent almost a full day screaming herself hoarse with every combination of words she could think of. None of it helped. None of it meant anything. Instead, she expressed herself through music. She began to play the most mournful, sobering solo I had ever heard. One I knew she was making up as she went along. One with which she communicated those parts of herself that words could not encompass. She stared us all down, eyes red and bloodshot, making eye contact individually as if to remind us that we were not a shapeless mass, that we were all individually responsible. I only barely remember the sound of it now, as if I'd heard it in a dream, and yet even now the memory tears at my heart. She performed for what felt like an eternity, and then in the end she slowly, calmly set down her violin, stood up and took a bow, and then she was on maid. Everyone stood up around me all of a sudden, and I was immediately caught up in it too, performing a standing ovation that dragged on and on. We screamed, shouted, cried, threw things, smashed our fists against seats, tore at our hair, laughed and danced with each other. It was the ultimate catharsis after all that silence, after a full day of holding it all in. Never before had I felt so connected to a crowd of people on some deep spiritual level. We marched out of the theater, stumbling like a procession of ghouls with blank faces and tired eyes. The staff were as polite as ever, thanking us for attending the performance and hoping that we enjoyed the show. Some were dragging the bodies of shot audience members out of the theater. As I finally emerged into the outside world, I was stunned to find it was all the same night I had entered. At least 20 hours had passed inside that theater. I was sure of it. But for the outside world, only 2 hours had passed. Exactly the duration listed on their job offer. I'd never been explicitly told not to reveal what I'd seen there, and now I knew why. Nobody believed me. Or worse, maybe they were covering it up. I swear to God the police dispatcher laughed at me over the phone. I swore I'd never go back. I'd been part of something evil, something unfathomable, and it would haunt me forever. But the next year was one of constant desperation, debt climbing as job opportunities declined at equal rates. I held out for about a year, but eventually I gave in, and to my horror, the next performance was easier, now that I knew what to expect. And then the next was easier still, and the next. The performance is always different, but the end result is always the same. I have to remind myself that I'm not culpable for what they're doing there. All I do is watch. We watch people die every day, in the news and online. People suffering horrible fates, often in places our own countries helped to destabilize. How are my actions any different, really? We all have to accept that terrible things happen in this world, and all we can do about them is either look away or look the horror right in the eye. Is choosing to look away more moral, or is it only more cowardly? And besides, wouldn't it be worse for them if there wasn't an audience? If they had to die there in the dark alone? No one seeing, no one caring, no one remembering. After all, someone has to bear witness. This is a collection of posts from the forum Redacted, from the user Redacted. Names of persons and locations have been either changed or redacted for safety. All hyperlinks have also been disabled. Post 1. Found an old ham radio. What are the basics? I should know. Date 17/6/2023. First time poster on Redacted. Hopefully you guys are friendly. I just have some basic questions when it comes to maintenance and care for old ham radio transmitters. I got my hands on a set from my uncle, who sadly passed away recently. While we were cleaning his house, I managed to snag the beauty from his attic. He was never in the army or anything, but he liked collecting old stuff. I guess I take after him. So, I was able to get this thing working. Took a few days of painstaking research to figure out how much power this thing needs and what parts are likely to break. I was able to Google the really basic stuff easily enough, but I'm sure there are things only you guys would know about. So, here I am, a ham radio virgin. What are the basic tips and tricks I should know if I want to use it properly and maintain it? Signed, James. Post 2. Found an old ham radio. What are the basics I should know? Date 18/6/2023. Wow, thanks guys. Awesome ideas and suggestions. I was able to source parts from the website Redacted recommended. Really cheap prices for such old school stuff. Great find. I've ordered a bunch of replacement parts as suggested. I've got it hooked up safely, and I've been browsing the channels. Haven't found anything super interesting yet, but you guys suggested getting a repeater to increase the range. How far can this thing receive? I did get one funny interaction with an angry truck driver though. I live near a highway, and a lot of big rigs pass by. I didn't know truckers still use these. Here's the recording I made. A transcript of the conversation from the audio. James. Okay, I just found a channel with people talking on it. Gonna prank them. James tunes into the frequency. A dog barks in the distance. Trucker 1. Any accidents heading southbound on the M4? Trucker 2. Negative. The sirens were going up the M4 and turning off. You should be good. James. Charlie Foxtrot. This is... Can I take your order? James laughs. James. Charlie Foxtrot. Do you want fries with that? Trucker 2. Get off this radio, kid. James laughs loudly. James. Got him. Anyway, that's it for now. So yeah, hopefully after I replace some of these parts, I'll be able to get a better signal, even with the highway so close. The audio quality was pretty bad. Thanks again. Signed, James. Post 3. My parts are here and the range has increased, picking up so much more. Date 25/6/2023. First off, I have to apologize for the prank I pulled earlier. I should have realized that enthusiasts like you lot don't mess around like that, and are here to document more serious things on the waves. In other news, after some trial and error, I've managed to replace most of the decaying parts with brand new ones. I didn't even know they made these components brand new anymore. I even managed to get my hands on a repeater. The sound quality has exceeded my expectations, and now the dials I replaced actually move properly, with the needle matching the frequency. For a beginner at airwave surfing, I think I've done pretty well. So here are a few things I've picked up over the radio. I've tuned into my local radio broadcast, but unfortunately, I can't transmit anything back. Not that I would, but it's a shame. There's been a lot of trucker talk about accidents and stuff, and I think I might have stumbled upon one of those pirate radio stations you all talk about. I live in Redacted, and it's a very mountainous region. Radio signals struggle to make it past the massive stone monoliths, and the infrastructure around here is pretty weak. I guess with the rise of Wi-Fi and all, there hasn't been much need for improvement. Anyway, there's a station on frequency Redacted. If anyone in the same region wants to tune in, it'd be cool if someone could corroborate what I've been hearing. It's exactly what you'd expect from a pirate station. Loads of conspiracies and wild theories about mind control and the like. Total nut jobs. Here's a link to what they were talking about. Hyperlink deleted. Transcript. A dog barks in the distance as James places his phone. James. Alright, I found a pirate signal. It's Redacted if you are nearby and want to listen. Let me just tune in. Static fluctuates, then a clear male voice comes through. Conspiracy host. And they've got them. And now, with the addition of another tower in the area, I'm telling you, the signal it produces is going to fry our brains. James snickers. Conspiracy host. That's why yours truly keeps it analog. You won't catch me on the internet or using their phone plans. The conspiracy host continues rambling as James speaks. James. He's been ranting about 5G all day. It's a new theory every day. At least for the past 2 days I've been listening. Interesting times, I guess. Thanks for tuning in. So what do you guys think? Have I stumbled onto something cool yet? I'm not sure if this is the right place on the forum for discoveries. Maybe someone can point me in the right direction. Maybe I could track down the crazy guy's signal and pay him a visit at his cabin in the woods. Please don't take that seriously. I'm not that stupid. Thanks. Signed, James. Post 4. Getting dead signals every now and again. Is this normal? Date 26/6/2023. Hi again. Just checking in with you guys to see if this is normal. Best to ask the experts. It hasn't happened a lot, but occasionally I pick up a signal where it's just, well, dead. As in, there's nothing. No static, no tone shifts, just silence. It's eerie as hell. I looked it up, and generally dead air refers to the silence between broadcasts. What I don't like is that this silence seems to pop up randomly while I'm tuning. If I'm picking up absolute silence, that means something is there, right? It's only happened a few times, but now that I've noticed it, I swear it's happening more often. I'll let you guys decide. Here's the audio. Hyperlink deleted. Transcript. James, let me just tune in. It's really specific with its frequency, like I have to be exact to find it. Static and scrambling before it goes silent. James. There, right there. Silence. James. What's up with that? No feedback or anything. The weirdest part is that if I nudge it just a little... Static resumes. James. Strange. Hopefully you guys can figure this out. Is this a faulty part? Thanks again. Like I said in the audio, have I accidentally fried a part? Everything looks fine, so I don't think so. Maybe I installed something incorrectly. Thanks, signed James. Post 5. Getting dead signals every now and again. Is this normal? Date 27/6/2023. There's something strange about these channels. I don't really know how to describe it, but I've been noticing them a lot more. I'll be tuning in, listening to some trucker chatter, and then suddenly it just cuts out mid-sentence and that eerie silence is back. It's not like they stop talking. It's more like the signal itself just gets snatched away. People on here have said to be mindful of channels like that. They say you never know who might be listening in. Honestly, I doubt that's the case. I've been unplugging the ham set whenever I finish using it, and I'm always really careful when I come across these dead air broadcasts. I never talk about anything private or incriminating. Still, I appreciate the concern. Signed, James. Edit. Just as I was about to post this, something happened. I was typing up this post when I heard the radio start tuning by itself. There was flickering static and that high-pitched whine before it went completely quiet. To be honest, I'm scared. I still am. Just to put my mind at ease, I'm going to leave my phone recording in the room while I'm at school. I'll post what I find tomorrow when I get back. I'm really hoping it's just a fault or something. Please tell me this is an easy fix. Post 6. You need to hear this. Date 28/6/2023. I don't even know what to title this post. If you've been keeping up, you know something strange is going on with my set. This morning I left for school and decided to leave my phone recording next to the ham radio. I'll just let the audio speak for itself. I've edited it down to the relevant part. Hyperlink deleted. Transcript. There's silence, occasionally broken by a dog barking and the muffled sounds of cars or trucks passing by. After a while, the distinct click of a switch being flicked. The frequency starts tuning, eventually landing on the silent tone. This holds for about 2 minutes before the switch clicks again. Now, some of you guys might think I'm messing with you, but I'm really not. A few people also suggested I might have installed an automatic tuner. I didn't. So how do you explain the switch turning on by itself? And that tone? It's not silent anymore. If anything else happens, I might have to give this hobby up. This is some seriously weird stuff. Sorry if I freaked anyone out. I'll keep you all posted. James. Post 7. Been hearing things lately. Date 1/7/2023. Sorry for the lack of updates. I've been back and forth to the doctors. Don't panic, it's nothing too serious. Just headaches and a lack of sleep. I've developed a severe case of tinnitus, which is odd because I've always been careful with my hearing and volume levels. But I've ended up with it anyway. It just never stops. It's like this low, constant buzzing tone. And if I focus on it, it gets fuzzier, so I try not to. The sleeping pills they gave me helped a lot, but it's been horrible for all my fun hobbies like gaming. Every time I sit down to watch a show or play on the computer, the static sounds intensify tenfold, and I can't stand it. Even when I go outside for a walk, it seems to linger. The doctor says it's something I'll get used to. No known cure, apparently. It's awful. Regarding my last post, a lot of you commented that you didn't hear the tone when the radio switched on in my recording. I thought it was clear as day. I'll adjust the gain for any future recordings. Also, the random switching on has stopped, and no more dead air channels either. Seems like that glitch has been resolved. Thanks again for the support and suggestions. Hopefully, I'll be back to finding cool things on the airwaves soon. James. Post 8. Someone is talking to me. Date 3/7/2023. I don't know how this is happening, but someone has been trying to contact me through my set. I really hope it's not one of you guys pranking me, but the chances of that are slim, considering how far apart we all are. Maybe it's someone local trying to mess with me. It's definitely not the truckers, and I'm sure it's not the conspiracy nutter either. It sounds nothing like them. The voice is low, almost melodic, like they're struggling with the language. If it happens again, I'll record it on my phone and post it. Edit. It happened again. I've got it all recorded. You need to hear this. I'm seriously done with this. I'm terrified. Link. Hyperlink deleted. Transcript. James. Someone's trying to contact me. I was scanning through signals when I hit another dead air broadcast. I waited for a few seconds before someone called out. I'm going to try and communicate. There's some shuffling as James picks up the microphone. James. Who is this? There's a long, drawn-out pause. The recording remains dead silent, though the sound of James' tense breathing is clear. James. How do you know my name? More silence. Only James' increasingly shaky breaths. He shifts uncomfortably. James. What? The hell do you mean? Silence. A slight rustle of clothing is heard, as if James is gripping the microphone tightly. James. Signal? I don't understand. What is this? There's no static, just an oppressive absence of sound. James. Part of what? James' voice trembles. More silence. James. What is this? I'm done. A sharp click as the radio is switched off, followed by a deep breath from James. His voice is barely a whisper. James. What was that? A rush of movement is heard and the recording stops. I'm done, guys. I'm getting rid of this cursed thing. I hope you understand. James. Post 9. I talked to him. Date 7/7/2023. Firstly, how can't you guys hear the voice in the previous post? It was so clear. Most of the comments saying they heard nothing. Some said they heard something, but not words. I boosted the gain and everything. Sorry, I'm just losing it a bit. The static, it never stops. It's always there. I couldn't bring myself to throw out the radio. I want to, but it's like, it's stuck to me. The only thing that keeps me going, that spark of something, but the static is making it hard to think, to even, I don't know, function. The screens, I can't even look at them anymore. It's like they burn my eyes. It takes so long to write these posts out. It's the signal. It has to be. The ringing, the sadness. It's all because of that. It's his fault. The conspiracy guy, he knows. I know he knows. I found his radio signal again and I talked to him. I recorded it. I don't remember saying half the things I said. Here, you'll see what I mean. Hyperlink deleted. Transcript. James coughs, sounding hoarse. A dog continues to bark constantly through the recording. James. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Why is the signal doing this to me? The static grows louder in the background, a low hum underneath it. James coughs again as he tunes the radio. James. Oi! There's a long pause. The static hisses, then quiets suddenly. Conspiracy host. Who is this? James. What did you do to me? Conspiracy host. What? Who is this? James. You were talking about signals. Why can I hear it? There's a sigh from the host. He sounds really tired. Conspiracy host. I don't know what you're talking about, kid. Look, this isn't funny. James. No, you're going to tell me. The static briefly fades out and in again, like a breath being held and released. James' voice trembles. James. What is happening to me? Conspiracy host. Look, I don't know what you want, kid. Whatever this is, it's a sick joke. James. No. James' voice starts warping, distorting as if the radio signal itself is twisting his words. James. You will stop this. Conspiracy host. What's wrong with your connection? James' voice becomes suddenly scrambled, unintelligible except for sharp, broken syllables, like a machine trying to speak. James. I want it to stop. The static swells violently. There's a sharp crack like an electrical surge, a faint echo of something breathing, followed by a soft thud as if James collapsed. There's silence for a full minute before a distorted breath is heard. The recording ends. What is happening to me? Please, someone help me. Post 10. Can't sleep anymore. Date 8/7/2023. I've been sick. I can't go outside. The sun, it burns, even through the curtains. I can't stare at screens either. The brightness, the flickering, it's unbearable. My phone's the only thing I can look at now, but not for long. I had to turn off the cellular activity. I only used the Wi-Fi. The buzzing, it was like holding a swarm of wasps near my head. The noise hasn't left. It's constant, gnawing at me from the inside. Sometimes I get so dizzy I throw up. It's getting harder to keep down food, or maybe I just don't want to. It's not that I'm hungry. I feel something gnawing in my gut, something deep, but it's not normal. It's like the idea of food itself feels wrong. The nausea comes in waves, triggered by nothing. My mother keeps trying to get me to the doctor, but I can't move. The pain, it grips me whenever I try to stand, to leave. The idea of leaving feels dangerous, like something's out there waiting. So I stay. It's safe here. Except for the noise. The noise won't stop, and that dog, he's been barking for days. He never stops. The sound drills into my skull, mixing with the buzzing in my ears. I can feel it vibrating under my skin like something else is trying to get out. The following text is copied verbatim from the post. Post 11. Need silence. Date 9/7/2023. The TV gone. Computer gone. It smells in here. Don't care at all. The buzzing won't stop. Why won't it stop? I smashed it all, but still it's there. Everywhere. Taste. It was the only thing I could eat. No more noise. Too much noise. All the time, but now it's quiet. Kinda. My stomach hurts, but it was the only thing. Nothing else. No food works. Just that. Mom, she's still knocking. Can't open the door. Not now, not after it. Can she smell him? I bet she does. I hear it. It's everywhere, but that's fine. Don't remember recording. Hyperlink deleted. Transcript. The recording is of James coughing violently as he breathes heavily. This is broken up by the smashing of screens and electrical equipment. James. Shut up. A window breaks and something impacts the ground. Most likely a computer. James. Why? I broke them all. The connection should be broken now. A violent cough. The ham radio springs to life. It tunes to a station. Conspiracy host. I can't stop hearing it. They found a way to get to me. James collapses and crawls to the radio. A sound of a small bone being torn. Conspiracy host. I thought I was careful, that I was safe with analog, but no. I was targeted, and now... The host pauses for a few seconds as meat is being ripped with teeth. Conspiracy host. No, I didn't. You all need to destroy your radios. It's in the analog now. It gets into your head. You must destroy them. The host suddenly cuts off to dead air, then static. It sounds like James is eating something. Meat tearing and bones snapping. This goes on for about a minute before he violently throws up. James. Why? He's the only thing I could eat. He was so loud, he had to be quiet. There is a knock at the door. James. Shut up, shut up, shut up. The phone moves and the recording ends abruptly. The radio's still here. Always here. I thought I smashed it, but it's always back. Or maybe I never threw it. I can't think. Maybe not supposed to. I don't know. Everything's loud, but quiet now. Quieter. Maybe if I stay here, just here, don't move, it might stop. The pain will stop. I feel it in my bones. Can't keep food down. I needed to do it. Just this. I need to eat more of him. Soon. You are my lifeline now, guys. Phone's still okay. You can listen too. Post 12. W. Date 9/7/2023. Hyperlink deleted. The audio is over 12 hours long of silence. At 9 o'clock on 14/07/2023, police constables redacted and redacted were dispatched to residential address redacted following reports of an unresponsive household and of bizarre activity on an online forum, redacted by one of the residents. 17-year-old James. Officers arrived at the address and found the front door ajar. A foul odor was detected emanating from upstairs. Attempts to locate the subject's mother, redacted, were unsuccessful. Neighbors reported last seeing her on 10/07/2023. Officers proceeded upstairs. The door to James' bedroom was closed upon arrival. Inside, the corpse of James was located, multiple lacerations over his body. His head was eviscerated, face was torn open, skull splayed apart. The victim's brain was missing, gorge marks inside the skull. Officers observed blood trails leading to the window. The corpse of a small terrier was also located, dismembered and in an advanced state of decay. Officers observed numerous human bite marks on the corpse. Significant damage to the room's contents and structural elements, including deep scratches along the walls and torn mattress and bedding. The bedroom was strewn with broken electronic devices, television, monitors, frayed cables. Officers observed parts of a personal computer smashed on the ground in the backyard, beneath the bedroom window, which was broken. The computer appears to have been thrown through the window. Officers located an undamaged ham radio set, with a number of small tools and radio parts placed neatly beside the radio. The radio set was turned on, broadcasting on an open frequency. Officer redacted reported hearing a buzzing sound emanating from the radio. However, Officer redacted did not hear the sound. Conclusion. The case remains open. An active search for the mother is ongoing. Initial inquiries suggest James had recently displayed signs of escalating psychological distress and violent outbursts. The cause remains undetermined pending further interviews and gathering of evidence. The residence at redacted has been quarantined and put under Class BSL-4 biohazard restrictions until the case is concluded. Further investigation required on extent of distribution of the posts on the forum redacted. End report. When I was a child, I had a best friend named Roger. He was adventurous, outgoing, and unbelievably kind. He really brought me out of my shell. I was a shy kid and often overlooked by my peers. Not Roger, though. He always knew how to get me engaged and excited. I miss that kid. We loved exploring. I was always curious, and he loved the adventure and excitement. We lived across the tracks from the Rougher side of town, but we didn't mind. It had the best exploring, lots of abandoned buildings and forgotten streets. It was on that side of town that we came across the cellar. It was so odd, since the town we lived in didn't have any basements. Something about flooding, I don't know. But it was the first set of cellar doors either of us had ever seen. They were the old-fashioned kind, set in the base of a house but facing outside, like you'd see in a farmhouse, only this was attached to the crumbling ruins of an old church. Roger and I examined the doors, rusting iron with a padlocked chain wrapped around the handles. The padlock was just as old and rusted as the door, and I saw the mischievous gleam in Roger's eye as he turned it over in his hand. He was a resourceful kid, and quickly found a discarded piece of rebar nearby. Again, not the nicest part of town. He jammed it into the arch of the old padlock and began twisting. After a few turns, the rusted metal sheared and the chains fell away with a clatter. I looked around nervously to see if anyone had heard, but there was nobody nearby. I peeked around the corner and the only person I saw was an overweight clerk through the window of a nearby drugstore. He hadn't seemed to notice. The doors of the cellar were rusted shut, and it took the combined effort of Roger and I to wrench them open. Once we had, the darkness beyond seemed to quell even Roger's adventurous spirit. I remember him trying to get me to go first. I remember calling him a chicken. That seemed to goad him well enough, because he puffed up his chest and strode down the creaky wooden stairs. I couldn't just taunt him and stay behind, so I followed him down. All things considered, the cellar wasn't particularly notable. There were some interesting things, like old sacrament trays and Bibles, plenty of cobwebs, a weird red book. It was creepy, sure, but nothing too out of the ordinary, except for the other set of cellar doors. It was on the opposite wall from where we came in. These were locked too, but from the inside, with a metal handle attached to a locking mechanism. I remember Roger turning it, the squeaking metal setting my teeth on edge. I assumed it led into the decrepit building, so I was surprised when it creaked open to reveal the same street that we had just been on, except everything seemed different. The most striking difference was the fact that the sky was a deep red, the trees were leafless and black, the streets were cracked and shadowy. It brought such an ominous feeling that I had never known. But Roger was brave and I was curious, and we had each other. Together we ascended the steps and stepped into this dark world. The first thing I noticed was the church, not crumbling but erect and looming. Red bricks trimmed with black iron stood tall before us. The bell tower was ringed in upside-down crosses. Roger and I backed away, and I instinctively looked to the drugstore that stood across the street. It was there, still occupied by the overweight attendant. Only now he stood in the center of the store, staring blankly into the distance. At least, for a moment he was. Then he snapped his attention directly to me, and a strange expression overtook his face. I could not discern it from where I stood, but I knew it to be unnatural. I yelped and turned to urge Roger to get back into the cellar, but he wasn't beside me. I looked around but could not find him. I assumed that he had returned to the cellar, and I rushed over to check. The doors were closed, and no matter how hard I yanked, they would not budge. I called out to him. I yelled and told him that this wasn't funny, that he needed to open the doors. I shouldn't have made so much noise. I heard shuffling from around the corner of the church. I was frozen in fear, 10 years old and alone in a hellish version of my world. I won't deny it. I cried for my mother then, and the worst part, the shuffling, it was her. Only it wasn't. She beckoned me over from behind the corner of the church. She whispered sweet words on the wind, but her face was wrong. Her eyes were black and her mouth was too wide. "Come to the feast," she had said. There was blood dripping down her unnaturally long chin. I could see past her shoulder, A crowd, a horde, all clustered together, tearing into something that I couldn't see. I began to cry. I wrenched on the cellar doors. They moved a little, but not enough. My mother slunk toward me. Her body was lithe and slender, but disproportionate. Everything seemed too long. Then he was there. Roger was beside me, pulling on the cellar doors. Together we managed to get them open and we dove inside. They slammed shut behind us on their own accord. We dashed out of that place and we didn't stop running until we were on the other side of the tracks. When we stopped to catch our breath, I finally got a good look at Roger. He did not seem the same. His clothes were the same. His voice was the same, but his eyes, his features... He smiled a too wide smile and stroked my face once. Then he turned to leave. Every day I have struggled with my decision to say nothing, to not go back and look for my friend. Worry haunts me that he roams that hellscape alone and afraid. But a part of me knows he isn't alive anymore. As for Roger, well, he tried to fit in. For a time, however, his unsettling demeanor was impossible to ignore. Everything was changed. The way he looked at people, the way he moved. He almost passed as the real Roger, but everyone noticed that something was off. Even still, the news of his parents' dismembered bodies found in their bed shocked the entire town. Nobody saw Roger after that. There was a statewide manhunt, or child hunt, really. But he was evasive. I saw him once, though, outside my window in the dead of night. I woke to that ominous feeling of being watched, and I saw him there staring in, grinning his too wide smile. He waved at me, breathed fog onto my window, and wrote something in it with a skeletal finger. I pulled the covers over my head and called for my parents. At first they thought I had a nightmare. The trauma of the murders was so fresh after all. But then I pointed to the window. Written in the foggy glass were the words, "Thanks, friend." The cops came and scanned the property, but they of course found nothing. That was years ago. Sometimes I feel like I see him on the street, grinning at me from a distance, but whenever I try for a closer look, he's gone. I know he's still out there. I know because I've received many more notes, sometimes handwritten in the mail, sometimes scrawled on my driveway, once keyed into my car, all saying the same thing. Thanks, friend. That and the murders that seem to follow me around, one every year. Dismemberment. I don't know what I unleashed that day, but I know it isn't my friend. And what's worse, I don't remember locking the cellar door behind me. The sound of police sirens wailed loudly inside the room, but he didn't move. To be honest, I'm not even sure he blinked. He just sat there as he had the entire room in his chair, surrounded by stacks of books, each collecting a thin layer of dust that had made its home on them. So is there anything else I need to know? I asked curiously, staring at the man sitting in the chair. His eyes were droopy, almost as if he were asleep. His hair was wiry and uncombed, pointed in the air, and his almost white beard had little specks of drool. It was as if he were in a different world as I stood there, in his little red and black checkered robe. No, he just sort of sits here all day watching police procedure shows, Bailey responded, parting her bangs with her hand. Her green eyes darted back over to him as he still sat there staring through the TV. I could tell she was ready to get out of her green scrubs and pass over responsibilities to me. Let me show you where to sleep. He sure does have a lot of books, I added as we walked out the room, entering a hallway with dark blue walls, dark colored floors leading to a row of open doors. Each room was similar to the one the man was in. Organized chaos, books on shelves, stacked on tables. the floors, and any other object that was available. Yeah, he was some sort of scholar. I think an archaeologist or something like that, Bailey replied as we entered a room that had lime green walls. A queen-size bed nicely made with dark gray sheets and a slightly darker comforter. A relatively modern metal and wood nightstand sitting next to it. A small lamp resting on top of it. This is you. Should I try to pick up and straighten up the place? Bailey laughed. No, we're nurses, not maids. His son can pay for a cleaning service to deal with it. Gotcha, I said as I laid my backpack on the bed and retrieved my phone charger, plugging it into the wall. So you said you already fed him his dinner, right? Bailey nodded. Yep. All you have to do is put him to bed, and to be honest, sometimes if he falls asleep in the chair, I just leave him. He seems to just like being there with his shows. What does he usually do for breakfast? I usually just cut up fruit with some yogurt. Seems easy enough. Yeah, I would just relax, catch up on reading or sleep, Bailey said, pulling out her phone and looking at the time. So do you think you need anything else? I don't think so, I answered as Bailey headed back to the hallway. Her nose pointed to her phone as she texted furiously, and we walked towards the front door, passing the room with the man. Guns were firing on the television. It's an easy gig, Bailey remarked as she pulled out a set of keys. They jingled her hand as she seemed restless to leave. So, I will be back in a couple of days to take back over, but call me if you need anything. She hastily exited the front door. As I turned back, walking to the room with the old man, the television was still blaring. I looked over to see his eyes were no longer drooped down, but were now fully closed. It looked like my night was going to be easier than I thought. I waited for a few moments before a dull snore came from the man. I debated whether to turn the television off, but decided to not bother before heading to my room, quietly shuffling to my room as to not disturb him. The bed was actually more comfortable than I expected, as I began to scroll TikTok to relax. It groaned as my eyes began to open. I watched the door crack slightly. The room was now dark. I must have dozed off while on my phone. My eyes were blurry, but the sound continued as the door opened further. Hello? I asked quietly, debating whether it was an old house settling or someone like Bailey checking in on me. A light scraping noise came from somewhere I couldn't quite pinpoint. It was unsettling enough for me to reach to turn on the light. I sat up in bed to see something was out of place, but there was no one in the room with me, nor anything that could be making the scratching noise. I got out of bed and stuck my head out into the hallway. It was dark except for the glow of the TV screen from the man earlier. I could hear a faint sound like people talking, as if he were deep asleep with the show still on. I closed the door and settled back into bed, turning off the light and beginning to drift off again, when the door slowly opened once more. The creaking sound became louder as I heard the doorknob hit the wall. There he stood, the old man. His eyes were no longer closed or droopy, but open wide like a startled animal. He hunched over and slowly walked into the room with me. His hair was still standing and his robe dragging on the floor. He looked around the room, his mouth agape, studying it from the floor to the walls and even the ceiling. I almost said something before I noticed something. He slowly crept around the room before turning his sights on me. He held something tightly gripped in his hand, which made every hair on my body stand up and tingle. I could only get a brief glimpse, but it was enough to scare the hell out of me. A knife in his hand. I don't know why I pretended to still be asleep, but he inched closer to me, his eyes and mouth still wide open, as if he were walking like a zombie in the bedroom. He stopped at the foot of the bed watching me as I pretended to sleep. I felt I was done for, but he just let out a strange chuckle before turning around and slowly shuffling out of the room. I laid there, my mind racing as I searched my bed for my phone. Quickly grabbing it, while getting out of the bed, I quietly walked to the door, sticking my head out once again. This time I was greeted with creaks and croaks from wooden floors along with the sound of television. He was walking around, but I couldn't see him. He was in one of the other rooms. Where, though? I just knew I had to get out of the house as quickly as possible. I walked as lightly as I could. The sound of him walking was intentionally heavy and menacing. Wherever he was in the house. A few steps in, a loud sound came from underneath my feet. The hardwood floor had betrayed me with a light creak, but it might as well have been a scream. "You don't have to hide," a raspy, aged voice yelled as the footsteps picked up the pace, shuffling and dragging from somewhere nearby. I panicked as I pushed open another door in the hall and slipped in. "We can end this really quickly." The room was dark and musty. I could see the outline of a bed among more stacks of books. There were even books resting on the bed. It looked as if no one had used this room in years. "I'm going to find you," the voice shouted menacingly. The footsteps were coming closer. I had to hide as I looked around the room. Each piece of furniture, whether drawer, table, or even chair, had stacks of books upon it. I dashed towards the bed itself and crawled underneath, right before the door swung violently open. "Are you in here?" I held my breath, trying to hold back the urge to scream from the top of my lungs as I could hear him walk in. Each step he took, my heart felt like it would leap from my chest as he carefully walked around. "We are going to end this," the voice screeched. "I've been waiting for so long for the right moment to do this." He paused for a moment, staying stationary. I may have only been able to see his feet, but I knew he was looking. Not even a twitch came from me as I waited patiently, hoping he would give up on this room. After a few minutes, he shuffled out of the room. I peeked out to see the door still open, but the old man was nowhere to be found. I was just going to have to run for it. As I slid from underneath the bed and darted towards the hallway, I looked around to hear the old man yelling somewhere in the house. "I know you're still here." I just ran towards the door, the television becoming louder as I came near the room where I had thought he had peacefully gone to sleep. As I got closer, I could see the light pour into the hallway from the television, casting a shadow on the floor. He was in that room. I don't know why I stopped to take a glimpse, especially being so close to freedom, but I did, and I saw a figure standing in the dark right in front of the television, as if he were watching his show again. "I'm leaving and calling the police," I yelled out, catching its attention. A strange hissing noise came from the direction as the figure began to contort, its head twisting around to reveal that it wasn't the old man. It was something else entirely. It started to move quickly. Each inch it got closer, sounding as if its bones were snapping. As it wobbled its way towards me, I noticed that its skin was a dark hue of green, and its mouth was covered in crooked and sharp teeth, but something was missing. It had no eyes, not even eye sockets. I started to move towards the front door again, but it moved faster than I could imagine. I felt wet limbs with a putrid smell grab onto me, tossing me down as if I were nothing more than a doll. "Get off me!" I screamed from the top of my lungs as the creature pinned me down and bit into the air with a frenzy. I kicked and squirmed, trying to free myself from it as its mouth started to move closer to my face. I closed my eyes. Then I felt something wet hit my face. I've been waiting for you to show again. The raspy voice yelped as I opened my eyes to see a knife's blade coming from its face, oozing a dark blood as it dripped upon me. Been a while, but I knew you would show up. The creature shook its head in a panic, releasing its grip from me as I crawled from its grasp. The old man took the knife out of the skull of whatever lay before me. He lifted the blade high above his head before striking down on the creature again, causing it to screech. He continued to do so, each sound coming from it, becoming weaker and quieter, before it finally quit making a sound and lay lifeless on the hardwood floor. I wiped the dark, bloody substance from my face and looked at the man, struggling to stand and breathing heavily as I leaned against the wall. What the hell was that? I cried out. That was called using bait. My sister and I have always been attached at the hip. Literally. Being conjoined twins is like being in a lifelong three-legged race, except your partner is both your best friend and your worst enemy. You move in sync, but you also fight over every decision. Left or right, fast or slow, now or later. There's no escaping it. We share everything. Our movements, our thoughts, even our hearts. We've always done everything together. There was never a choice for better or worse. But what happened on that fishing trip, that was something I never imagined we'd share. It was a sunny day on the lake, the kind of family outing that felt ordinary, peaceful. Our parents had brought us out for a relaxing afternoon, fishing rods, sandwiches, the works. Mom was setting up lunch on the picnic table, and we were helping her, passing plates and cutting bread. One of us holding the knife, the other steadying the food. It was a routine we had perfected over the years. That's when the fox appeared. At first, it seemed curious, sniffing the air around our picnic, but then it lunged. I didn't even see it coming, but my sister did. It clamped down on her arm, snarling, its teeth sinking deep into her flesh. She screamed, a sound that echoed through me like a thunderclap. I tried to pull her back, but we're connected, and there was nowhere to go. It bit her again and again. By the time Dad shot the thing, its teeth were stained with her blood. The hospital trip was a blur. Doctors stitched her up while I sat there numb, tethered to her by our shared flesh, feeling her pain as if it were my own. They talked about rabies, about shots that would protect us both. But we share a heart, a circulatory system, parts of our nervous system. We're not like other people. The treatment didn't work. Days passed and my sister started to change. At first it was small things, restlessness, twitching. She complained of feeling hot, then cold. Her eyes became wild, darting around as if they were tracking something I couldn't see. I could feel the heat radiating off her. Our bodies connected, her fever coursing through me. I got tired, but not like her. She wouldn't sleep, her muscles tensing, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. Then came the violence. One night while we were alone in our hospital room, she turned on me. It was as if something inside her had snapped. Her eyes, once so familiar, now gleamed with a terrifying primal madness. Before I could even call for help, she lunged at me, teeth bared, her fingers clawing at my skin. We fought, struggling against each other, but I couldn't escape her. Not when we were bound together, our bodies tethered by flesh and bone. She bit me twice before the nurses rushed in, sedating her, pulling her back just enough to keep me alive. Now I sit here in this cold, sterile room waiting. The doctors say she has rabies and it's too late for her. They've tried every treatment, every sedative, but nothing seems to calm the animal inside her for long. She's dangerous, violent. She's not her anymore. They've separated us as much as they can. Horizontal cushioned bars attached to the hospital bed, fabricated to fit between us safely and securely. The dense, padded plastic presses against our upper torsos, snug around our ribs, soft enough to protect our skin, yet firm enough to keep us apart. It's an unyielding divider, designed specifically to restrain her without hurting me, a desperate measure to contain the growing madness. I can still hear her, though. Low, guttural growls, her shallow, rapid breaths. Sometimes she laughs, a twisted, hollow sound that no longer belongs to her. I can feel the infection inside her, pulsing through our shared heart, our connected blood. The doctors check me constantly, waiting for any sign that I might be next, but so far, I've remained lucid. Every day I watch her through the bars, her eyes wild, her body twitching in its restraints, but I wonder how much longer I can hold out. She's been sedated for days now, slipping in and out of consciousness, but even in sleep I can feel her presence gnawing at the edges of my mind. Every now and then her body jerks violently against the restraints, the metal rattling as if she's trying to break free. The worst part isn't the separation, it's the waiting. Knowing that I'm losing her, knowing that she's still there, but no longer the sister I've always known. The doctors tell me she's gone, that the rabies has taken her mind, her soul, everything that made her my sister. But we share a body. I can still feel her. I can still feel the rage, the hunger seeping into me. They told me I should say goodbye, but how can I? We've shared everything, every movement, every breath, for as long as I can remember. How do you say goodbye to someone when you're not only losing them, but losing yourself, too? When every word sticks in your throat because you're not just letting go of your sister. You're saying goodbye to your loved ones, to everything, before you even have the chance to mourn the loss of yourself. How do you face the end when it's not just hers, but yours, too? Creeping closer with every breath. Every time I feel our heart beat, I feel weaker. I whispered to her today. I told her I loved her, even though I know she's not really there anymore. I told her I'm sorry, that I didn't know how to save her. I'm typing my final goodbye, searching for the right words. The room is quiet, except for the faint hum of the machines around us. My hands tremble, the weight of everything pressing down as I try to let go. But then I feel it. A subtle, disturbing shift beside me. I glance over and my blood runs cold. My sister's wide, bloodshot eyes are open, staring at me through the cushion bars. Her lips curl into a maniacal smile, teeth gleaming in a way that makes my stomach twist. She doesn't blink, just keeps smiling as her body jerks harder, the restraints straining under her movements. I freeze. The words on the screen blur, my hand hovering over the keyboard, forgotten. My sister is awake. The moment I stepped into the apartment, it felt right. It was small, yes, but it was mine. After years of moving from one shared space to another, I was ready for something of my own. Even if it was just the modest one-bedroom on the outskirts of the city. The rent was reasonable, the area quiet, and best of all, it was a space I could shape to my liking. No more tiptoeing around roommates' habits or schedules. This place was a fresh start. The building itself was older, maybe from the 1970s, with the usual quirks of an aging structure. The hallway leading to my door smelled faintly of cleaning products and mildew, the paint peeling slightly at the edges. but I figured I could live with it. It added character, I thought. The apartment had a certain charm, too. Wooden floors, a decent kitchen, a view of the tree-lined street below. Nothing fancy, but comfortable. The first night after I moved in, I went through the usual ritual of unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. The work was exhausting, but satisfying. The routine of it kept my mind occupied, and by the time I finished, I was too tired to do anything but fall into bed. As I lay there staring up at the ceiling, I could hear the muffled sounds of the building around me, the hum of distant traffic, footsteps from the apartment above, and the occasional creak of the walls settling. It was normal. Old buildings made noise, I reminded myself. That's just how it is. But there was one sound that stood out. It was faint, barely noticeable at first, like a soft, rhythmic pulse. At first I thought it was coming from outside, maybe from the heating system or plumbing. I turned on my side, trying to ignore it. Moving into a new place can be disorienting, especially when you're not used to the sounds of the building. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off. The next few days were uneventful. I settled into my new routine, going to work, coming home, and slowly making the apartment feel like mine. I found a local cafe down the street, started exploring the neighborhood a bit, and even managed to meet one or two of my neighbors. Everyone was polite, but kept to themselves. It was exactly what I wanted. Quiet, low-key, uneventful. But that sound, that faint, rhythmic pulse kept coming back. At first I only noticed it at night, when the apartment was still and there was nothing else to distract me. I'd be lying in bed trying to relax, and there it was. A steady, almost mechanical rhythm, like breathing. It was faint enough that I could almost ignore it, but persistent enough that once I noticed it, I couldn't unhear it. One night after a particularly long day at work, I found myself lying awake again, listening to that sound. It seemed to move, or maybe it was just my imagination, but I could swear it wasn't coming from one fixed place. It shifted, first near the bedroom, then closer to the living room, but every time I got up to investigate, it stopped. I checked the windows, thinking maybe it was something outside, but there was nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual sounds of the city, muffled and distant. I started to rationalize it. The building was old after all. Maybe it was something in the walls, pipes, or the ventilation system. I convinced myself it was something explainable, even though I couldn't quite pinpoint where it was coming from. I told myself it didn't matter. I just needed to adjust to the quirks of the place. Besides, there was no one else around to notice it, and none of my neighbors had mentioned anything strange. But then, one evening, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I had been home for a few hours, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, the faint hum of the TV in the background. The apartment felt cozy, almost comforting, and I was beginning to feel like I was finally settling in. That's when I heard it again, that same rhythmic sound, but this time it was louder, and for the first time, it seemed to follow me. I got up from the couch thinking maybe I could track it down. As I walked from the living room to the kitchen, the sound seemed to shift. It was still faint, but now it was more noticeable, like someone softly exhaling just behind me. I paused, turning around, expecting to find something, anything that could explain it, but there was nothing. The apartment was empty, just as it always has been. Feeling uneasy, I turned on more lights, as if that would somehow drive away the strange sensation. I checked the vents, the windows, even the floorboards, but there was no obvious source for the sound. It wasn't coming from outside, and it wasn't some appliance or piece of furniture. It just existed. After a while, the sound seemed to fade, leaving me feeling foolish for getting so worked up over something that was probably just the building's plumbing or some other harmless quirk. Still, that night, I had trouble falling asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was waiting for that sound to come back, waiting to hear it again. In the following days, I tried to put it out of my mind. I threw myself into work, met up with friends, and did anything I could to avoid being alone in the apartment for too long. But no matter how busy I kept myself, that feeling of unease lingered. The sound didn't go away. It was always there, just at the edge of my awareness, especially at night. Then one evening, while I was in the middle of cooking dinner, I heard it again, clearer this time, as if someone were standing right behind me, breathing steadily just out of sight. I stopped what I was doing, heart racing, and turned slowly, expecting to find someone or something standing in the doorway, but again the room was empty. This time, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. This wasn't just the pipes or the walls. Something about the way the sound seemed to follow me was too specific, too deliberate. I turned off the stove, grabbed my phone, and stepped outside for some air. For the first time since moving in, I felt genuinely unnerved. And that's when I decided I had to find out what was really going on in this apartment. It wasn't like me to get so spooked. I wasn't the type to believe in ghosts or paranormal nonsense, and I'd never been prone to anxiety or overthinking things. But ever since that night, when the sound seemed to follow me from room to room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off in the apartment. Rationally, I kept telling myself there was an explanation. Every old building has its quirks, right? Maybe it was the ventilation system, or maybe the walls were thinner than I thought, and I was just hearing the neighbors' movements somehow. But it wasn't just the sound itself, it was that feeling that came with it. A sensation that wasn't easy to describe, like being observed when you know no one else is there. I started wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. But the sound was so consistent, so steady. It didn't feel like something I was imagining. The next day at work, I decided to do some digging. During my lunch break, I searched online for anything about strange noises in apartments. There were the usual results: old buildings settling, faulty pipes, drafts in poorly insulated walls, but nothing that matched the specific rhythmic pattern I was hearing. I kept digging, reading through forums and articles, but still came up with nothing definitive. I was beginning to think I was alone in this, that it was just some weird thing about the apartment I'd have to live with, but something in me couldn't let it go. That evening when I got home, I decided I would try and trace the source of the sound more methodically. I started almost on cue. As soon as the apartment settled into its evening quiet, there it was. The soft, rhythmic pulse, like someone breathing slowly in the background. I stood in the center of the living room trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. It felt louder tonight, or maybe I was just more attuned to it. Either way, it seemed to be everywhere and nowhere all at once. I started walking around the apartment, pausing every few steps to listen. The sound didn't get louder or softer, but it always seemed to be nearby, no matter where I stood. I checked the vents, leaning in close, trying to detect anything that might be causing it, but there was nothing. I pressed my ear against the walls, half expecting to hear a neighbor's TV or conversation, but all I could hear was the steady pulse. Growing more frustrated, I moved into the kitchen and turned off all of the appliances. Maybe the refrigerator or the microwave was emitting some kind of sound I hadn't noticed before. But when everything was off, the sound was still there, unchanged. It wasn't mechanical. It was too soft. Too human. Next, I decided to check the windows again. I opened each one, listening for any street noise, but the sound didn't seem to be coming from outside. I even went so far as to stand in the hallway outside my apartment, wondering if it was something in the building itself, but as soon as I closed the door behind me, the noise disappeared, leaving only the usual hum of the building. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the stale hallway air, trying to think of what to do next. I felt ridiculous. It was just a sound after all, but the longer it persisted, the more it seemed like something I needed to figure out. Not just because it was unsettling, but because I couldn't let it go. I couldn't live with this constant, unnerving presence in my home. Back inside, I resumed my search, this time moving into the bedroom. It was the one place I hadn't fully checked yet, mostly because I dreaded the idea that the sound might be strongest where I slept. I stood in the middle of the room, listening intently, and there it was again, faint but steady, like it had been all along. I crouched down, checking under the bed, even though I knew there was nothing there. The floorboards creaked slightly as I shifted my weight, but that rhythmic pulse remained constant. I moved toward the closet next, pulling the door open and rifling through my clothes and boxes, but there was nothing unusual. No hidden vents, no odd wiring. Nothing. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall, feeling defeated. I had tried everything, and yet the sound persisted, as if it was mocking my attempts to understand it. And then I realized something. I had been trying to track it down physically, like it was a problem I could solve by moving things around or turning off devices. But what if it wasn't something in the apartment? What if it was something in the apartment's history? The thought made my skin prickle. I didn't like the direction my mind was going, but I couldn't ignore the fact that nothing I had done so far made a difference. I grabbed my laptop and sat on the kitchen table, determined to find out more about the building. It didn't take long to track down basic information. The building was constructed in the early 70s, as I suspected, and had gone through several ownership changes over the years. But what caught my attention was an article buried deep in the old local news archive. The headline read, "Body discovered weeks after tenant's death in local apartment." My heart skipped a beat as I clicked on the link. The article was brief, a few paragraphs detailing how the body of a middle-aged man had been found in his apartment several weeks after he had passed away. Neighbors had complained about a smell, leading the landlord to enter the unit. By then the body had decomposed, and the man had been dead for nearly a month. I read on, my eyes scanning for details. The article didn't mention which unit the man had lived in, but it did say that the building's ventilation system had been faulty at the time, which had delayed the discovery of the body. For weeks, the man's decomposing body had been releasing gases into the air, and it wasn't until the smell became overwhelming that anyone realized something was wrong. I sat there staring at the screen, my mind racing. Could it be? Could the strange sound I was hearing be connected to that? It seemed far-fetched, but at the same time, it was the only thing that made any sense. The ventilation system, the pipes. It had to be something left over from that, right? Some lingering effect of the tragedy that had taken place in the building all those years ago. But even as I tried to convince myself that it was a rational explanation, the thought of it unsettled me deeply. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this, something I wasn't seeing yet. And as I sat there, the rhythmic sound continued, steady and unrelenting. It was as if the apartment itself was breathing. After reading the article, I couldn't shake the image of the decomposing tenant from my mind. It was disturbing enough that someone had died alone in this building and remained undiscovered for weeks. But what really gnawed at me was the possibility that I had moved into the very same apartment. The sound I'd been hearing, steady, like someone breathing, felt all too connected to the story. The next morning I decided to take things further. I wasn't satisfied with what I had learned online. I needed to know for sure if this apartment had been the site of that tragedy. I also wanted to know more about who that man had been. Was there something about him that might explain the strange presence I was feeling? My first step was to visit the building's property management office. I figured they wouldn't give me detailed information about former tenants, but I hoped they might at least tell me more about the apartment itself. I had never met the landlord personally, only dealt with the office staff when signing my lease, but I was determined to get some answers. I walked over to the office, a small, unimpressive space tucked behind the main building. The receptionist at the front desk glanced up as I entered, giving me the bored, detached look of someone who dealt with too many tenant complaints. I cleared my throat and tried to sound casual. "Hi, I live in apartment 6B, I said, leaning on the counter. "I was wondering if you could tell me anything about the history of the unit. I'm just curious about who lived there before me." She frowned slightly, typing something into her computer. "Is there a problem with the unit?" she asked without looking up. "No, no problem," I replied, though I could hear the nervousness creeping into my voice. I heard something about the building's ventilation system being an issue a while back, and I was curious if it affected my apartment. I like to know the history of places I live, you know?" The receptionist hesitated, her finger still hovering over the keyboard. "The building's old," she said, in a tone that suggested she didn't want to deal with whatever concern I might bring up next. "There have been repairs over the years, sure, but we take care of any major issues. If you're having a problem, I can send maintenance." I shook my head quickly. "No, it's not that. It's just, was there ever an incident in that apartment? Like, did something happen to a former tenant?" Her eyes flickered with something like recognition. She glanced at the screen in front of her again, then back at me, her expression guarded. "I'm not really supposed to share details about previous tenants," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "But there was an incident. It was a long time ago." I leaned in, my curiosity growing. "An incident? What kind?" The receptionist glanced around as if checking to see if anyone else was listening. Then, lowering her voice, she said, "A man passed away in that apartment a few years ago. Natural causes, I believe, but he wasn't found for a while. There was an issue with the ventilation system at the time, and..." She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable discussing it further. So, it was true. My stomach twisted as I realized I had been right. I was living in the same apartment where that man had died. I thanked the receptionist and left the office, my mind racing. I had the confirmation I needed, but it didn't make me feel any better. In fact, it only made things worse. The idea that I had been hearing something connected to that man, or to his death, was too unsettling to ignore now. I couldn't just write it off as pipes or ventilation noises anymore. There was a connection between the sound and the history of the place, even if I couldn't fully explain it yet. Back in the apartment, I found myself more aware than ever of the space around me. Every corner, every wall felt heavy with the knowledge of what had happened here. I tried to keep myself busy, telling myself it was all in my head, but the sound was there again that night, steady and rhythmic, as if something was lingering just beneath the surface of normal life. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts kept returning to the article, to the details the receptionist had confirmed. I found myself wondering about the man who had died here. Who was he? How had he ended up alone, unnoticed for so long? I tried to picture his final moments. Did he know he was going to die? Had he tried to call for help, but no one heard him? The next morning, I decided I needed more information. I had to understand the full story. I couldn't keep living in this apartment with these half-formed suspicions lurking in the back of my mind. So I had turned back to the internet, this time searching more specifically for details about the man's death. It took a while, but I eventually found a few more references to the incident. The man's name was Michael Harris. He had been in his late 50s, lived alone, and from what I could gather, had no close family or friends nearby. His death had gone unnoticed for weeks, and by the time the building staff had discovered him, his body had already begun to decompose. The article mentioned that neighbors had complained about the smell, but it wasn't until the stench became overwhelming that anyone thought to check on him. Reading about Michael Harris sent a chill through me. The idea of dying alone, with no one to care or notice, was horrifying in itself. But something about the way the article described the discovery of his body stuck with me. It mentioned that the ventilation system had been pumping air from his apartment into the rest of the building, which was why it had taken so long for anyone to realize something was wrong. I thought back to the sound I had been hearing, the rhythmic, breathing-like pulse. Could it really be that simple? Was I hearing something left over from that faulty ventilation system? Maybe it wasn't supernatural after all. Maybe it was just the remnants of old air, trapped in the ducts, still circulating through the building. But even as I considered that explanation, I couldn't shake the sense that there was more to it. I couldn't ignore how specific the sound felt, how it seemed to follow me, to shift in intensity depending on where I was in the apartment. It wasn't just an ambient noise, it felt alive. That evening I made a decision. I couldn't live like this, constantly wondering and second-guessing myself. I needed to confront whatever was happening, once and for all. I waited until nightfall when the apartment was at its quietest, and then I sat in the living room listening. The sound was there, as always, soft but present. I focused on it, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. It was faint at first, but after a few minutes it grew louder, more distinct. I stood up and began to follow it, moving slowly through the apartment, from the living room to the kitchen, then back to the bedroom. The sound seemed to move with me, just as it had before. But this time I wasn't going to let it scare me. I was going to face it head on. And then, as I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, something strange happened. The sound stopped. Complete silence filled the room. And for the first time, I felt truly alone in my apartment. That silence was heavier than any noise I had ever heard. It pressed against me, thick and suffocating, as if the absence of the sound was more oppressive than its presence had ever been. I stood in the bedroom doorway, frozen, waiting for the pulse of that rhythmic noise to return, but it didn't. Instead, there was nothing, just the quiet hum of the city outside, muffled and distant. I tried to tell myself that this was a good thing. Maybe I had finally figured it out, or maybe the sound was just some odd quirk of the building that had now resolved itself. But deep down I knew it wasn't over. Something had shifted in the apartment, and the silence wasn't a relief. It was a warning. That night I barely slept again, but it wasn't the sound keeping me awake this time. It was the absence of it, the way the apartment felt unnaturally still, like it was holding its breath. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to rationalize everything that had happened. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces didn't quite fit together. The ventilation system theory seemed plausible enough, but why had the sound felt so personal? Why had it seemed to follow me? By the time morning came, I was exhausted and jittery, unable to shake the unease that clung to me. I went through my day at work in a fog, barely able to focus. My mind kept drifting back to the apartment, to that silent, unsettling space I'd left behind. I considered calling someone, maybe a friend or even a professional, just to get another perspective. But what would I say? Hey, I think my apartment might be haunted, but don't worry, it's probably just bad ventilation. I knew how ridiculous it sounded, and I wasn't about to embarrass myself over something I couldn't even explain properly. When I got home that evening, I half expected the sound to be waiting for me, picking up right where it had left off, but as I opened the door, I was greeted with the same thick silence. The apartment felt different now. Not just quiet, but empty in a way it hadn't before. I set my keys on the counter, listening for any hint of that familiar noise, but all I heard was the faint hum of the refrigerator. I tried to settle into my usual routine, cooking dinner, watching TV, but everything felt off. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Every little noise from outside the window felt like an intrusion. I was on edge, constantly waiting for the sound to come back, for the rhythm to start up again, but it didn't. The apartment remained silent, and with every passing hour my anxiety grew. That night, as I lay in bed, I finally allowed myself to consider the possibility that something else might be going on. Something beyond faulty pipes or old ductwork. I didn't want to believe it. I'm not the type of person who jumps to supernatural conclusions, but the strange consistency of the sound, its almost deliberate movements, and the way it had stopped so suddenly, all made me wonder if there was something more, something tied to the man who had died here, to Michael Harris. I thought about him a lot that night, imagining what life had been like, what his final days had been like, alone in this very apartment, unnoticed by anyone. I wondered if he had felt the same sense of isolation that I was feeling now, if he had heard the same noises, or if this was something new, something connected to his death, or maybe even to me. The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a fitful sleep, but it wasn't a restful sleep. My dreams were disjointed, full of fragmented images, Michael Harris's face, the empty hallways of the building, the rhythmic pulse of that sound echoing in the background. In one of the dreams, I was standing in the middle of the apartment listening, waiting for the sound to start, but instead of hearing it, I saw it. Ripples moving through the air like invisible waves, and in the middle of those ripples was a figure, standing perfectly still watching me. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the apartment still dark and silent around me. I lay there disoriented, trying to shake the feeling of the dream, but it clung to me. The figure, the ripples, it felt too real, too vivid. I rubbed my eyes and glanced at the clock. It was just after 3 a.m. That's when I heard it. It started quietly at first, so faint I almost thought I was imagining it. But as I lay there holding my breath, it grew louder. The same rhythmic pulse, steady and soft, just like before. It was back. I sat up in bed, my heart racing again, and listened. The sound wasn't coming from the bedroom this time. It was coming from the living room. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up, moving slowly toward the door. The sound grew louder as I got closer. Still soft, but now unmistakable. It was as if someone was standing just beyond the living room, breathing slowly, deliberately. I stepped into the hallway, my feet moving almost on their own. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it, but nothing added up. I wasn't scared exactly, but I was tense, every muscle in my body on high alert. I told myself I was going to confront it, whatever it was. There had to be an explanation. As I reached the living room, the sound seemed to shift, like it was moving again just beyond the edge of my awareness. I stopped in the middle of the room, standing perfectly still, and listened. The pulse was steady now, louder than before, but still soft enough that it felt distant, like it was coming from just beyond the walls. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped again. I stood there in the middle of the living room, surrounded by silence, my breath shallow and my pulse racing. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea where the sound had gone, or why it had stopped. All I knew was that it had come back, and this time it felt different, more deliberate, more aware. I glanced around the room searching for anything out of place, but everything looked normal. Just my furniture, my belongings, the same space I had been living in for weeks. But something had changed. I could feel it in the air, in the way the silence seemed to press against me, almost suffocating. I was no longer alone in the apartment. I backed slowly out of the living room, retreating to the hallway, my eyes scanning for the space around me. Every instinct told me to leave, to get out of the apartment and figure this out from a safe distance. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Something was keeping me there, holding me in place as if I needed to see this through, to find out what was really happening. I stood in the hallway for what felt like an eternity, listening, waiting for the sound to return, but it didn't. The silence remained, thick and heavy, wrapping around me like a blanket. And then, just as I was about to turn and go back to bed, I heard something new. It wasn't the rhythmic pulse this time. It was a soft creak like the sound of a floorboard shifting under the weight of something. Or someone. I turned slowly, my heart in my throat, and saw it. There, in the doorway of the bedroom, stood a figure. It was faint, almost like a shadow, but it was there, unmoving, watching me. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt real fear. The kind of fear that grips you so tightly you can't move, can't think, can't breathe. And in that moment I knew, whatever had been making that sound wasn't just in the walls. It was here with me. For a moment I couldn't move. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the figure in the bedroom door. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing, to fit it into the realm of reality, but nothing about this felt real. The figure was just standing there, barely more than a shadow, its shape indistinct, but unmistakably human. Every rational part of me wanted to believe it was a trick of the light, a figment of my sleep-deprived mind. Maybe I was still dreaming, caught in the fog of that strange half-sleep state where everything feels off but plausible. But this wasn't a dream. The figure didn't move, but its presence was palpable, like the weight of eyes on you when someone is staring, that invisible pressure in the air that makes your skin crawl. I took a step back, my breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts, trying to force myself to think clearly. I should have run. I should have turned and bolted out of the apartment, but my legs didn't cooperate. Fear had a grip on me now, squeezing tighter with every second that passed. My mind raced through possibilities, desperate for an explanation. An intruder? A shadow? A reflection? But none of them made sense. I blinked hard, my vision blurring slightly as I did, and for a split second the figure seemed to waver, almost like it wasn't fully solid, but it was still there, still watching. A sudden thought hit me like a bolt of lightning. Michael Harris. Was this him? Was this what was left behind, lingering on the apartment after his death? The rational part of me recoiled at the idea, but after everything that had happened, the sound, the strange feelings, the way the apartment seemed to change, it was hard to shake. The figure had to be connected to him. There was no other explanation. I stood there in shock, struggling to find the nerve to react. After what felt like forever, I finally pushed myself to say something. "Who are you?" My voice came out quieter than I intended, barely more than a croak, but it was enough to break the silence. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. It just stood there, a dark shape in the doorway, like it was waiting for something. The stillness of it was almost worse than if it had moved. There was something unnatural about how it just remained, motionless, without a sound. I took another step back, my legs shaking. My mind screamed at me to get out, to run, but I couldn't bring myself to turn away. Something about this moment felt final, like I had reached the point of no return. I needed to know what this was, What had been haunting me ever since I moved in? I forced myself to speak again, louder this time, trying to keep my voice steady. Are you Michael Harris? The second the name left my lips, the figure shifted. It was subtle, just a slight tilt of the head, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. The name had meant something. I felt it, like the air in the room had suddenly changed, like a weight had lifted or maybe shifted. The figure still didn't speak, but its attention was unmistakable. It was as if I had acknowledged something that had been waiting to be seen. My heart hammered in my chest, and I couldn't tell if I was more terrified or relieved. Terrified because whatever this was, it had just responded to me. Relieved because at least now I knew I wasn't losing my mind. I hadn't been imagining the strange noises, the sense of being watched. This thing, this presence, had been here all along. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. If this was Michael Harris, if this was some remnant of his life, then maybe there was a way to help him. Maybe he was stuck here, lingering in the apartment, unable to move on because no one had noticed him in life, and now no one was paying attention in death. What do you want? I asked, my voice shaking. Why are you here? The figure didn't move again, but the air around me felt charged, like the space was holding its breath. I realized then that the sound I had been hearing, the rhythmic, breathing-like pulse, had completely stopped. The apartment was eerily silent, as if everything had gone still, waiting for something to happen. I took another step back, and as I did, the figure seemed to fade slightly, as if it were being pulled away. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes again, it was gone. The doorway was empty. I stood there, trembling, trying to process what had just happened. My mind raced, replaying the encounter over and over, trying to make sense of it. I had seen it. I had seen something, but now it was gone, leaving me alone in the quiet apartment. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, staring at the empty space where the figure had been, but eventually, my legs gave out, and I sank onto the couch, my hands shaking. The adrenaline that had been coursing through me drained away, leaving me exhausted and confused. What had I just experienced? Was that really Michael Harris? Was I imagining things, or was this apartment truly haunted by some lingering presence? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every creak of the floor, every shift of light had me on edge, waiting for the figure to return, but it didn't. The apartment stayed unnervingly quiet, as if whatever had been haunting me had finally gone. The next morning I made a decision. I couldn't stay here any longer. Whatever was in the apartment, whatever had been following me, I didn't want to find out any more than I already had. I packed my things in a frenzy, barely stopping to think, throwing clothes and belongings into bags as fast as I could. As I walked out of the building for the last time, I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I knew was that I needed to get as far away from that place as possible. It's been a few months since I left the apartment, and I still think about it sometimes. About the figure, about the sound, about Michael Harris. I don't know what it was that I saw or why it was there, but I do know one thing. Some places hold on to the past in ways we can't explain, and sometimes the past doesn't want to be forgotten. I moved to a new apartment across town, one with bright windows and modern fixtures, a place that feels fresh and clean. I haven't heard any strange sounds here, no rhythmic pulses or mysterious figures watching me from doorways. Life has returned to normal, or at least as normal as it can after an experience like that. But sometimes late at night, when everything is still and quiet, I can't help but listen, just to make sure. And every so often, I think I hear something. A faint, steady sound. like someone breathing.